We're about to tackle one of the most haunting questions in the entire Bible. It's a story of incredible hope that kicks off with an act of just unspeakable terror. Let's get right into it. This is the question right at the heart of the Christmas story that we just don't talk about it much, do we? The very same chapter that tells us about wise men and worship also tells of screams in the dark. How does that work? It feels like a massive contradiction. On one hand, you have what is arguably the single greatest moment of hope in all of human history, right? The rescuer everyone's been waiting for. God himself shows up. He enters our world. And yet, that arrival is immediately met with just brutal violence. But here's the thing. The Bible doesn't try to hide this tension. Not at all. It actually invites us to look deeper, to see this unseen war that's happening right behind the story we think we know. Okay, so to really get what happened, we first have to understand the world Jesus was born into. And this was ancient Judea, a place that was, for sure, living under a very dark shadow. And right at the center of this whole tragedy is one man, Herod the Great. Now, this was not some kind benevolent king. No way. He was a tyrant, totally obsessed with power. We're talking about a guy who literally murdered members of his own family. He killed his own sons just to get rid of any potential rivals. His entire kingdom was held together not by loyalty, but by pure, terrifying force. So you have this world just simmering with paranoia and violence. And right into the middle of it walks a piece of news that's about to be a spark in a powder keg. So the wise men show up, right? And they have this simple, honest question based on what they've seen in the stars. But pay attention to how Herod hears it. He doesn't hear a baby has been born. No, he hears a rival has arrived. And for a guy who kills his own kids to protect his crown, the news of a new, true king, that's not good news. That's a declaration of war. Because let's be honest, kingdoms don't share thrones. And this right here, this is where the story pivots from just being a historical event to something way, way bigger. See, what happened in Bethlehem wasn't just about one paranoid king. It was the physical playing out of a much deeper spiritual conflict. And that brings us to this really crucial idea, spiritual conflict. Just think about it. Throughout history, whenever God takes a big, decisive step to save people, the forces that oppose him, they don't just sit back and watch, they react. And a lot of the time, they react with violence. And what's so incredible is that this shows us Bethlehem wasn't some random isolated incident. Not at all. It's part of this clear, repeating pattern you see all through the Bible. Remember, when Moses, the deliverer, was born, what did Pharaoh do? He ordered the Hebrew boys to be killed. When God's prophets spoke truth to power, Queen Jezebel hunted them down. And now that the ultimate Messiah is entering the world, Herod unleashes a slaughter. It's almost like evil panics when it knows its time is running out. And this is really the key takeaway here. The violent reaction, it wasn't against some new philosophy or a new set of religious rules. No, it was a reaction against the arrival of a true and rightful king, a king whose authority was going to unseat every other power out there. Okay, but that still leaves us with the hardest question, doesn't it? Where was God in all this pain? How are we supposed to make sense of the suffering of those poor families in Bethlehem? Well, the story actually gives us three really profound truths to hold on to. First, Jesus wasn't born into some peaceful, welcoming world. He was born onto a battlefield, deep in enemy territory. Second, our suffering isn't always a sign that God is gone. Sometimes, and this is tragic, it's the violent backlash from evil because God has drawn near. And third, God didn't cause Herod's cruelty. His presence exposed it. It showed the world exactly the kind of broken, violent place he came to save. And this might be the most challenging, but also the most powerful insight from this whole thing. The mothers of Bethlehem didn't suffer because God was far away. They suffered because God had come near. The tragedy wasn't a sign of God's neglect. It was the result of evil's violent reaction to his presence. Think about that. Jesus entered right into our suffering. He was a hunted child from his very first days on earth. But the story, thank God, does not end on that dark night in Bethlehem. That violence was a terrible attack, for sure, but it wasn't the end of the war. So let's see how this event actually builds toward the ultimate purpose of Christ's mission. Just look at this progression. First, evil tries to wipe out the threat when Jesus is just a child, and it fails. Then, it tries again on the cross. And for a moment, it looks like it worked. But that very act of violence becomes the thing that brings salvation. The cross, this weapon of death, becomes the doorway to life and resurrection. It's amazing. Every single attempt to stop the kingdom of Christ only ends up pushing it forward. And it all points to his final return, not as a helpless baby, but as the one true, uncontested king. So let's bring this home. What does this ancient story of tragedy and hope mean for us right here, right now in our lives? It means this: if you're going through something hard, if you're suffering, it is not proof that God has forgotten you. It might actually be proof that you're living faithfully in a world that is still resisting the light. Evil still lashes out when God's kingdom breaks through. But here's the crucial thing you have to remember: evil is on a deadline. And that's the haunting but also incredibly hopeful truth hidden inside this tragedy. That horrible massacre, it wasn't an act of strength. It was an act of desperation. It was an act of pure fear. The enemy knew the king had arrived, and the enemy was terrified. And so that leaves us with a question to think about. If just the arrival of Christ's kingdom provoked such a violent reaction back then, what does it threaten today? What systems, what powers, what parts of our own hearts does his kingdom challenge? Look, the story of Bethlehem is dark. There's no getting around that. But it isn't the end of the story. The kingdom of Christ cannot be stopped. Not by violence, not by power, not by fear. The world tried to kill him before he could even speak a word, and it failed. And that same child who escaped Herod's sword, he will return. And when he does, he will return as the king who finally ends this war forever.